G'day, it's Mark, and welcome back to the channel. And in this episode in our Commodore Auto History series, we look at the VK. The VK Commodore was produced from February 1984 to February 1986. The car was designed by Leo Pernot, who was in charge of Holden design at the time. And the cars were assembled in Adelaide in South Australia at Elizabeth. Also the Melbourne plant at Dandenong in Victoria. Trentham at outside of Wellington in New Zealand, where I used to work years ago. And also some completely knockdown kits went to Indonesia. The VK was the fourth generation of the Holden Commodore, and it was a major restyling effort by Holden. The VK Commodore range was the first Commodore to feature plastic bumpers front and rear, and it also introduced in the sedan models a new quarter window for a six-window design, and that was similar but not the same as the Opel Senator that was offered in Europe. The VK Commodore also featured upgraded engines, new front and rear bumper bars, new interior, new instrumentation, including a digital instrumentation on the Calais model, new taillights, and a lot more. I remember the first time I saw a VK Commodore, I went up to the dealership, Sutton's at Waitara, and I saw the Commodores parked outside the showroom there at night. And I said to my friend, finally they've updated the rear window. I always thought that was quite a dated C-pillar on the Commodore, and I felt that, the addition of an extra window and just to sharpen up that area in front of the C-pillar was something that was definitely needed to bring the car up to a more modern appearance. In terms of the styling, the VK Commodore certainly had a very new appearance compared to the previous model. The new grille design was very different from earlier Commodores, with three very strong strips that ran horizontally that came to a point in the centre versus more metallic grilles on the previous models. As I mentioned before, the cars also featured new front and rear bumper bars, now made of plastic. These certainly looked more modern than the previous chrome bumpers, although personally I preferred the chrome ones. But that was, I guess in keeping with where the 1980s models were heading from a styling point of view. There were also new instrumentation. The base model moved to square dials rather than round dials. I personally didn't like those instruments at all. Reminded me of like a Nissan Bluebird or something like that. I just thought they looked pretty cheap and tacky. Certainly the Calais with the digital dash looked very good. I like that. I quite like the digital dashboards. That was all the rage in the 80s on luxury models. In terms of the reliability of that, though, I know there were some issues with it. Engines included the 1.9 litre 54 kilowatt or 72 horsepower Starfire 4, and that was available in the New Zealand market only. In Australia, the standard engine was the 3.3 litre 86 kilowatt or 115 horsepower black engine. There was also the option of a 3.3 litre 106 kilowatt or 142 horsepower EFI black engine. There was a 5 litre 126 kilowatt or 169 horsepower V8 engine. And there was also a 177 kilowatt version or 237 horsepower version of that same engine. Because of Group A rules with motor racing, there was also a 4.9 litre 196 kilowatt or 263 horsepower Holden engine, but I'll get into that a little later. Depending on the engine, available transmissions were a 4-speed manual, a 5-speed manual, or a 3-speed automatic. Dimensions of the car, the length was 4,714 millimetres or 185.6 inches, a wheelbase of 2,668 millimetres or 105 inches, width 1,722 millimetres or 67.8 inches, and height of 1,360 to 1,378, depending on the model, millimetres, which is 53.5 to 54.3 inches. Curb weight varied between 1,220 to 1,366 kilograms, or 2,690 to 3,012 pounds. The model range also came in for some changes. The VK range introduced some new names and specification levels. So there was now an Executive, which was a standalone nameplate, and that was sold alongside the base SL. The Executive was basically an SL with automatic transmission and power steering, and that was aimed at capturing the fleet market. And speaking of the fleet market, this is really where Holden had lost a lot of market share in terms of overall volume up against the Falcon XF. The XF was an incredibly popular model, very well equipped, and it dominated the fleet market and to some degree the retail market as well, but particularly the fleet market, because of its larger packaging size over the Commodore. Also new to the range was the Commodore Bellina. This replaced the SLX. And above that was the Holden Calais, which replaced the Commodore SLE. Station wagons were available in SL, Executive or Bellina variants only. There was also a limited edition Vacationer, and that came along as a special value pack, which Holden had often done in the past. Also part of the model range was the Commodore SS, which featured its own specification, courtesy of Holden dealer team, HDT. There was a high-performance 4.9 litre V8 and a limited edition through HDT dealers only, Commodore SS Group A and Commodore Calais Director series. I mentioned earlier the different Holden V8s that were available, and not all of these were available on all models. So, for example, there were two versions of the 5-litre Holden V8, which was replaced by the 4.9-litre V8 when the Group A rules entered Australian Motorsport in 1985, as I mentioned. And that was fitted to the SS Group A, which was released in March 1985. There were two versions of the 3.3-litre Black Straight 6, which was basically a blue engine with some slight increases in power and efficiency. And you could buy that with either a carburetor or fuel injection. The fuel-injected 3.3-litre engine was standard equipment for the Calais sedan with the option of a V8. The V8s were also optional in all the other models. Because of some challenges around the location of the fuel pump in the station wagon models, the fuel-injected engine was not available in the VK at launch, but it was released around 8 months later. Gone from the range was the 2850 six-cylinder and the 4.2-litre V8. I'll just touch briefly on the New Zealand models. These were built at the Trentham plant in Wellington. I used to work there, but the plant had stopped making cars. It was still the Holden's official head office. I headed up sales there back in the 90s. But the VK New Zealand editions were slightly different from the Australian ones. There was the availability of the 4-cylinder engine, the 1.9. They also had smoked rear tail lights and also a lack of emission controls on the engines, which the Australian cars had to deal with. Now, the 4-cylinder Commodore was no longer available in Australia, but it was available in New Zealand. And even though this engine you had to drive it pretty hard to get it going, which meant that it wasn't that economical, but despite this, it was actually remarkably successful in New Zealand, unlike its lack of success in Australia. And positioned below the Calais, there was an upmarket model, which was the Commodore Royale, which was sold exclusively in New Zealand as both a 4 or a 6-cylinder. And luxury options included in that were air conditioning, electric windows, electric mirrors, and a 5-speed manual transmission. And again, this reflects more that 2-litre market segment in New Zealand, which is the dominant segment, as opposed to Australia, which was always the 6-cylinder segment. There was also a limited edition in New Zealand of 120 GDS sedans, and these all had the 3.3-litre EFI engine, midnight blue paint, silver bumpers, 15-inch alloy wheels, as per the Royale or Calais, cerulean blue interior with the same cloth as a VK SS Group A black rubber boot spoiler, black Momo wheel, GDS badging, red pinstripe. And these cars also could be had with FE2 sports suspension. The Commodore SS Group A was a very heavily modified car by Holden's official performance partner, which was the Holden dealer team, HDT. And the Group A SS existed primarily as a homologation special, and it was created so that a racing-optimised version of the Commodore could compete in the Group A touring car racing series up against Ford and a variety of other competitors from Europe as well. One of the requirements was that there had to be a minimum of 500 cars built in certain specifications in order to be homologated to enable the cars to compete. The VK competed at Bathurst and also the Spa 24-hour race. The Group A Commodore, also known as the Blue Meanie, has become an extremely collectible car and it's very much sought after these days. It's also worth mentioning that there was a 5044cc, so a 5 litre SS Group 3 that was built, but that actually had less power than the 4.9 litre Group A edition. So the first model produced, which was the Blue Meanie, that was produced from March 1985 to February 1986. And it represented Holden's efforts to, increased efforts to compete in Group A racing. The car was only available in blue, and that was associated with the corporate colours of the team principal sponsor, which was Mobil Oil, and it gave rise to the nickname the Blue Meanie. While production began in early 1985, there were parts supply problems, and HDT failed to build the required 500 vehicles. And so it missed the August 1st deadline to be eligible for racing that year. Production still continued, and the VKSS Group A was available for motor racing from the 1st of January 1986. 502 cars were available only through HDT dealers. Visually, the Group A VKSS had a rear spoiler, larger front air dam, more aggressive front grille over the standard VK Commodore. Other changes included double-row timing chain, which eliminated an inherent weakness of the single-row chain in that V8 engine of Holden's, as well as stronger conrods and suspension mountings. Power for the road-going Group A SS with its 4.9 litre engine was rated at 196 kilowatts or 263 horsepower at 5,200 revs and a top speed of 215 kilometres an hour or 134 miles per hour. Transmission options were the 4-speed M21 manual or an optional 5-speed Getrag T5. Although the T5G transmission was not an option for the VK Group A, some cars did get it fitted at the Bertie Street workshop, which was HDT's workshop, by a special arrangement. And in certain circumstances, it was also fitted by the dealer. Keep in mind that the customers for these sort of Group A cars were generally very wealthy, well-to-do, and often repeat customers. So dealers and HDT and Holden often bent over backwards to, meet their requirements. The cars were assembled at the Dandenong assembly plant in Victoria and modified, as I said, at Bertie Street, Port Melbourne by Holden dealer team. VK Group A Commodore SS, as I mentioned before, was originally intended to be ready for racing in 1985 to replace the near-standard VK competitors that they'd been forced to use before. However, delays in components meant that HDT had not built enough of the road-going Group A cars, as I mentioned, to pass homologation on the 1st of August. And in fact, Peter Brock recalls that talking to John Harvey, I used to work with John Harvey years ago at HSV, remembers talking to John Harvey, and John Harvey remarked that their personal road cars that they were driving were in fact faster than the racing cars that they were racing with at the 1985 Bathurst. I should also mention, prior to Group A, there was also the Group C, which was more the traditional cars, and the VK featured there the last of the big bangers. And just by comparison, a VK Commodore that HDT ran in the 1984 James Hardy under the old regulations, the cars had much bigger wheels, larger spoilers. They produced over 410 brake horsepower or more than 310 kilowatts and had a top speed of 275 kilometres an hour, 171 miles an hour. And this compared to what they were running in Group A, which only produced 300 horsepower or 220 kilowatts, so like 90 kilowatts less. And they had a top speed of 252 kilometres an hour or 157 miles an hour. So it was a huge difference and a huge drop-off between the Group C big bangers and the Group A cars. In early 1986, HDT gave the car a debut when Brock had his new co-driver, which was Alan Moffat, who'd been a Ford man for many, many years, and they won the Nissan Mobile 500 at the Wellington Street Circuit. While the teammates John Harvey and the new team engineer Neil Lau won the Pukekohe 500 in the second race of the New Zealand Series a week later. The two winning HDT cars were not brand new Group A models. Instead, they were the team's 85 model Commodores that had the 86 upgrades. The Holden dealer team then took two brand new cars to Europe for the 1986 FIA Touring Car Championship, one for Brock and one for Moffat. And there was one saved for the Spa 24-hour race and spare parts if needed. Brock and Moffat joined fellow Commodore privateers Alan Grice and Graham Bailey in Europe, with Grice in particular proving to be a revelation in the Les Small Roadways Racing Prepared VK. And he qualified well in front of the other race drivers at Monza, Donington Park and Hockenheim. In a dice for the lead at Hockenheim, it was a factory-backed Volvo 240 Turbo with reigning European Touring Car champion Thomas Lindstrom and Formula One driver Johnny Cecotto. Grice set the touring car lap record for the 6.823 kilometre circuit, and that wasn't broken until the year 2000. Pretty amazing for an Aussie car, eh? At the Spa 24-hour race, with Holden dealer team running their two cars and also teaming up with the Roadways Commodore of Grice, there were some problems with blown head gaskets in the number 5 car, and they had similar problems when they did 24-hour testing at Calder Park in Victoria. There was also an issue around a lost wheel and then a broken seat for Grice. That was caused by his oversized co-driver, Belgian jeweller Michael Delcourt. I don't know if he'd like to be called oversized, but that's what happened. But HDT refused to lend them a spare seat during the race. It's not very nice. Forcing them to borrow one from the retired TWR Rovers of Tom Walkinshaw's team. It's not very sporting, HDT. And no oil pressure for the second HDT car caused that end of the race for that. But the two teams claimed the prestigious King's Cup prize, and the second HDT car, driven by New Zealanders Lau and Ken Bajent and Graham Beaucourt, finished 18th outright. The Brock Moffat Harvey car finished 22nd, while Grice, Delcourt and the Belgian Alex Gouillet finished 23rd. Back on home soil, Grice and Bailey won the 1986 James Hardie Bathurst 1000. Grice also went on to win the Group A support race for the 1986 Australian Grand Prix in Adelaide. HDT and Roadways also sent their team Commodores to the Fuji circuit in Japan for the 1986 Fuji 500. Brock and Moffat were out after 94 laps, while Grice and Crosby car ran third with only a few laps left when they lost another wheel. It saw them slip to 5th place before the finish. I should also mention that in 1984, a VK Commodore also won, driven by Brock, the Bathurst 1000, and that was driven by Brock and Perkins. And that was in addition to Grice winning in the 1986 race. I think the VK Commodores were it was quite a good restyle, quite a good upgrade. It was certainly much needed. I think the cars were starting to date. And I think, the fact that Holden was struggling at the time in Australia with volume and profitability, the fact that they did invest in such a large restyle, was commendable. And as I said, they updated everything, the extra window, the bumpers, the instrumentation, the interiors. There was a lot of upgrades made to the vehicles. So, and I think those SS Group A's and those, Calais Directors and things like that, those cars really helped Holden's image, because Ford had dropped the V8 by then with the XF series, and they had the fuel-injected 6, but that was nothing compared to a V8. People who really wanted a V8, and a lot of young guys who loved V8s, Holden was the only game in town by this stage, and that definitely cost Ford some volume, because Ford wasn't able to really get back in the game until EB Falcon in sort of, 91, 92. So, Holden really was able to make hay in that regard. But in terms of overall sales volume, Ford still was comfortably ahead, with ultimate leadership in not just the Falcon segment, but overall market leader for passenger cars. It was one of the best periods for Ford Australia at that time. I remember one of my old girlfriends had a VK Commodore. She had a green Bellina V8 wagon. It was a pretty cool car. I remember driving that, and yeah, it drove quite well. It went quite well. And yeah, look, I think they're a good package. They're certainly a sought-after car today. I think probably the VH Commodore, the previous series, may be more desirable, but then again, it depends on the model. You know, if you look at a Group A, like a Blue Meanie or something like that, or a Group 3 SS, you know, those cars are very, very desirable, and more so, I think, than the equivalent VH Brock cars. I think certainly the VKs are more desirable. But I think, if I looked at, say, a VK Calais versus a VH SLE, I think a VH SLE would be regarded as a more desirable car. A total of 135,705 VK Commodores were built. So thanks very much for watching. Please give the episode a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.